Who will power the future? A conversation with Chet Parsons and Geoffrey Abraham on the next era of battery innovation. So from electric vehicles to home backup systems, batteries are central to the energy transition. But according to Geoffrey Abraham and Chet Parsons, many battery companies are overlooking a critical advantage, building a strong brand. Geoffrey is the founder of Self Brand Studio and has over a decade experience working in big agencies. Chet brings nearly 30 years of auto industry experience, which includes leadership roles at Tesla, Bollinger Motors and VinFast. He now has a consultancy, WCPFour, where he applies his expertise to helping businesses launch, grow or pivot in a rapidly evolving market. So in this episode, Geoffrey and Chet will share their perspectives on why branding matters just as much as innovation. Chet, Geoffrey, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's start with the big picture. Right now, battery technology is advancing rapidly, but the companies behind these breakthroughs have little to no public recognition. Why do you think this is?
I think Chet was chomping at the bit on that one. I'm going to let Chet have
it.
Speaking purely from the EV side, just as kind of an obvious here, is that it's not really made apparent. And I think there's an assumption with the consumer that whatever is in my car was made by the company that built the car. So a Tesla has a Tesla battery, a Ford has a Ford battery, a GM has a GM battery, which in some cases is accurate, but in other cases, or as you dig deeper, that battery may say Ford on the outside, but it may have been built by Samsung or CATL. And so the branding isn't brought forward to the customers much as, most customers wouldn't know who built the transmission in their internal combustion car or what tier one supplier that came from. So I think on the EV side specifically, that's a big portion of it, is it's not made known and there's not an awareness of it at that level.
I do want to dip into the EV world specifically because that seems to be where our passions lie, and it does seem like there's a real opportunity for battery companies to brand themselves through the vehicles as ways to charge homes that they're part of. But stepping back just a minute, maybe this is a novel thought, I don't know, but I find it interesting that I hear a lot in this world about how it's almost like an arms race, but a battery storage race between China and America, or who's gonna dominate the energy storage world first. And I was thinking about it, why is it these geopolitical issues as opposed to why aren't brands duking it out? Why isn't Siemens going up against Eaton, going up against ABB? Why aren't they the ones that are in the race to see who gets to battery storage fastest? Because they don't have nuclear weapons.
I think to that point, it's interesting. You mentioned Siemens and ABB and some of these other large energy providers, companies that have been providing the background and the source for this stuff, and have been providing tier ones to OEMs. And I don't know that they know that they need to get involved. And if you look at the powerhouses, the biggest is Samsung. Samsung knows. They know to do that, but it doesn't translate.
I think it translates when it comes down to dollars, and all their shareholders know about the importance of battery storage. I just can't believe the demands aren't on those companies to be accelerating that race as fast as U.S. versus China per se. But regardless, let's. I just needed to get that thought out there. Natalie, I see you're ready to ask another question.
Yeah. Well, you briefly mentioned the home energy market. I'd love to just explore that a little bit more. In areas with unstable power or rising grid strain, is it realistic to think that we'll all have battery systems in our homes soon?
I'm going to again defer to Chet on that.
The simple answer is yes. I think as the costs become more tenable, as things become more accessible, new home construction, renovations, upgrades, people will start to have the option of adding. I think it's going to be a trickle-down thing. I think when you see construction in areas like Pacific Palisades here in California that had the massive fires and is now rebuilding, I would venture a guess that a lot of those homes will have new power systems built into them, including solar and battery backup, and those kind of go hand in hand. But that's going to be starting at the high end. That's going to be the trickle down where premium properties, large homes, people who can afford those luxuries will add those in, and eventually it will trickle down. I think where it will make the biggest impact will be in multifamily and, not just residential, commercial. You can get buildings and data centers and, AI centers off of the grid or having less draw from the grid, or maybe even putting back to the grid. Then you could have a bigger benefit. I think just as in EV, I think the commercial space may lead the way there or would have a greater impact there.
I again go back to economics. I think that there's a way that we can be incentivized as homeowners to want to store energy and then, like Chet just said, either sell it back to the grid or hoard it all for ourselves when Armageddon comes. But I'm sorry, I keep going to this very dark place, but I find it interesting that there's this opportunity to sell energy in cars to homeowners that they could plug into their homes. And to Chet's point, these homes are all being built with this in mind. Why aren't they being integrated so that there are the two-way chargings built into every home, so that every car should be sold as an EV, so that everybody who's worried about losing power in their homes buys an EV because they know that that's their backup generator. And none of that story is being told in EV sales. None of that story is being told in battery sales. It seems like a no-brainer to me, but then again, I don't sit on the boards of these companies.
I think if you look at the case of a few years ago when Texas froze out their grid, literally, and people, Ford in particular, went in and was powering homes with their EV pickup truck, the Lightning, and I think even in some cases the Power Boost, which is their hybrid truck that had power generation for vehicle-to-home functionality. And it's not so much necessarily that the tech needs to reside in the car, but these new houses that are being built should have EV chargers as standard is, in building codes, and add that. And that's one thing to expect in Pacific Palisades, a wealthy neighborhood in California, progressive state with incentives, versus Texas, which is reluctant on the EV side. Even though it is a very big EV market, I think there is still some reluctance, as a state, and some reluctance from a political side to support that anymore. But that would be a great case of your homes cost less in Texas. It would be easier to build those homes with these power things. It would seem like the no-brainer there. And I think you do get into geopolitical stuff, local geopolitical issues to get to that point. But you're right. I think there should be some sort of directive or initiative or incentive to upgrade the power in your home. It's just an expensive undertaking for some places, and then it becomes an issue of cost. So,
which then becomes an equity issue, of course, which we all know about. So that you've got the haves who have power in their homes when the energy goes out, and you have the have-nots who are all without energy in their homes when the power goes out. So, I mean, I do think that there's, Chet, you're a lot more knowledgeable than I am on this, but I don't know the costs in these sort of things. But if the costs were reasonable in terms of implementing these things into homes, and apartment buildings and work buildings, it just seems to me like, yeah, you're right. That should just be code now. I mean,
sure. I think you're going to have the time. If you look at how much empty office space, for example, is in Los Angeles and big buildings that aren't even being used, did those get, whether those have power backups and things like that are almost irrelevant. But as new construction happens or as retrofitting happens, the commercial construction, the big buildings, the distribution warehouses that they're constantly setting up in Texas and in other places where these massive warehouse complexes for Amazon or whoever to do their delivery hubs, those facilities have the budget, they have the energy, and they're critical. These are delivery. These are some people's lifelines. I hate to say Amazon being a lifeline, but if somebody needs something and Amazon can't deliver it, then that puts them, and from an economic standpoint, that means Amazon's not making money on that delivery. To your point about this being an economic issue, but that seems to be the low-hanging fruit of big commercial construction and installation would make the most sense for these things to go in. And I think quietly there are companies that are focusing on that. There are some companies doing that. And in the automotive space and some of the EV production facilities have massive solar arrays and battery backup so that their production's not interrupted and they're not drawing as much on the grid. It becomes an economic benefit for them.
And then pivoting to EV, sorry, I like where you went there with your answer there, Chet. So let's pivot to EVs, where battery performance is absolutely central. So yeah, most car buyers aren't really aware of what powers their vehicle beyond the badge brand. So why hasn't energy storage become part of the EV brand story?
I think Jeffrey had a really good point about this earlier, so I'll let him pick up on that. But what I said earlier, I think a lot of this is awareness of components is not a thing that most people have when they're looking at a new car of any kind. If you go to buy a new pickup truck, the only things you might notice on it from a who supplied that part, and only because the name might be in white letters on the side of your tire, you might know that it has Goodyear tires versus Pirelli tires if you look closely enough and if you care. Otherwise, you don't know who made the or you probably don't know. Most consumers won't care who made the transmission, if it's an Allison or if it's an Eaton, or if it's something that was made by the manufacturer. The technical end of it, people don't want to mire down in. They just want to know that they can get in, turn it on, and go. But there is, I think Jeffrey, like you said, made a really good point about this. So I'll let him take this one. There's a way that could be of benefit that he pointed out is missing, an opportunity.
Yeah, I just think that, the example I gave Chet earlier and the example that every advertising marketing nerd uses is Intel Inside. And they did just such a brilliant job of slapping that label on every single electronic product so that you knew that when you were buying something, you could buy it trusted because it had Intel Inside. Was Intel the only microchip maker out there? No, there were hundreds of them. But you knew Intel. And so, and Intel doesn't even sell direct to customers. So why is it that hard for a battery to position themselves as the power source inside that you want? So yes, I want a Polestar, or yes, I want a Rivian, but I want the Rivian with the ABB inside, or whatever it is. I don't know. I just think, I was just saying to Chet, there seems a ripe opportunity there for battery makers and for car salesmen to plus up the game and make brands for themselves.
My counterpoint to that, as we talk through this, is that now I think we see the Intel Inside is still there. I think there's still a sticker on my laptop that says AMD because that's the other chip now, unless you get a native chip. So you see Apple, you see Samsung with the Exynos chips starting to kind of capture that because they want to own it, because they know that makes a difference. They want to compete there, and they want to cut Intel out of it because Intel could charge more by putting that sticker on the computer. And I think with seeing what manufacturers are doing, GM partnered with LG for the Ultium battery, but they don't talk about
promote it.
Yeah. LG. And does LG carry enough cachet as a name from TVs and phones and other things and batteries to make a difference? We won't know because GM's not trying. GM's having a hard enough time branding.
Intel did before Intel Inside, but
yeah.
I probably need to come up with a more current example, because Intel is currently laying off all of their staff and in the garbage in terms of microchip makers. So there are probably other ones that are, yes, making a name for themselves, to your point, now, but it was such a universal thing for so long, and it does seem like a ripe opportunity. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
I think I'm going to pull up the other thing you mentioned when we were talking before of the other brand reference that is in pop culture as well as in history of the consumer battery cells, the Energizer versus Duracell battery. Like that, there's the opportunity to do that and for someone to enter that market, and it could help potentially car makers, especially smaller car makers and startups, where Rivian can't say we have a partnership with whoever, GM can. And if Rivian says we're buying our batteries from Samsung, does that make a difference? Is that a positive? But if they had a battery that had such cachet and such a pull like an Energizer or Duracell, they could advertise that where GM might not, where they would lean into it and be more progressive with that.
Well, I'm going to go back to my old marketing guy ways and say that it really does come down to brand, because we were talking about this before, Chet. before Energizer was around in the 70s. I know that most people are around now don't know from this, but anyway, the copper top was the only battery, and they didn't have to be anything other than the copper top. They didn't have to do good ads or anything. They were the only battery, unless you wanted generic. And then came this pink bunny and disrupted the whole thing. And they're still the same exact product. They're two little metal cylinders that you put into a flashlight and turns it on. That's it. There's no so when you say Samsung versus ABB or somebody else, what difference does it make? All they need is the pink bunny. Somebody's got to put a pink bunny out for their new battery, and so that we have like real players in this space that people are paying attention to and care about. Like, we just have to create that care. It's not going to be created on its own.
So Geoffrey, just putting you on the spot now from your advertising head on advertising experience, if you were to pitch one of the leading battery companies right now today, what advice would you give them? How can they differentiate? What should their story? What should their play be?
My answer to that would be when you hire an ad agency that you trust and they come to you with ideas, you should go with the idea that makes you the most uncomfortable, because honestly, that's the stuff that disrupts. I guarantee you there was nobody in that Energizer room who thought a pink bunny slapping a cymbal was a great idea. Nobody. That's not how it works. But you have to disrupt what's going on out there. And right now we are in a sea of blandness. I mean, we've rattled off all the big battery companies, and you probably still can't name them because they're so boring. Like, there's nothing to them. So you need to disrupt, and you need a brand that stands out. And it's not rocket science. It's just being willing to do something that doesn't feel comfortable.
And I think the companies that have the technology and are willing to be more progressive on that are coming. I think that you'll see that in the residential side, where brands start to make themselves known. As you know, Tesla is really the primary there, but they aren't focusing as much on their home energy solutions as they are on other things right now. They have a lot on their plate. So I think the progressive brands, the new brands, the startups, Our Next Energy in Detroit, that company is new, they're local, they are supplying automotive, but they're also supplying commercial. Like, they could have that moment, they could go to that level and position themselves as a brand, and they have a good product, and they have potential, and they have backing. I don't know that you'll see a Samsung or a CATL or somebody, especially some of the larger Chinese companies, get that. I think you find the startups, and I think that's where somebody has the biggest opportunity, is to take a new brand that is established, to grow it and make it become the next Samsung. They could be the Energizer Bunny to Samsung's Copper Top.
They're typically the most willing to take that chance because they've got the least to lose.
Really is like, there's opportunity here. This is a segment that is not getting
tapped,
branded, it's not getting marketed, it's not becoming its own piece of this. And there's reasons why, but they're legacy reasons, they're old school reasons. There are more savvy customers now that might care when they're looking at a Tesla that's more like an electronic device than it is like an automobile. They might care that it has an Intel chip or an ONE battery or a Fluence battery versus whatever Tesla is using to source them, or wherever they're making them themselves. Because I guarantee you, a lot of Tesla customers don't know that Tesla was manufacturing their own batteries for most of their cars. That it's just not known. Nobody leans into it, and they could. We think that that's something that could be leaned into that's just not being addressed right now.
I think you said no one's disrupting at the moment. But is there one brand that's getting right?
From a branding standpoint, I don't know of any. I know them more because of my involvement with them. Like, I know who's supplying the companies I've worked for, and I've been down the discussions of a vehicle having both a Samsung or a CATL option. Nobody in the U.S. nobody cares about that. So I don't know that there is a brand that is specifically marketing their energy storage in a way to consumer, especially, or even B2B, in a way that is apparent and groundbreaking in any way.
I agree with Chet for the most part. I don't love anything that I'm seeing out there. But I will say, I would guess that Tesla owners are more aware of the fact that their car could power their house than any other electric car owners. That's completely out of thin air. I have no science to measure that. But it just seems to me like Tesla owners are aware of that. So if they are, somebody's educated them, up Tesla. Why are we not doing a better job
Yeah.
outside of that ecosystem?
Tesla's still the unicorn there in that they defined this space to a certain degree of EV, consumer EV, and acceptable scalable EV that wasn't a legacy OEM. And I think their clients are a little more savvy, a little better educated, specifically when it comes to EV. And those were the early adopters who bought Tesla and created the success that's there. When in the reality is, and like being able to power your home is less and less becoming an issue of the car. And most of the cars are going to have this technology coming, the vehicle to home or vehicle to grid, and it's going to be more an issue of having the home set up for it. That's going to be your bigger cost. It won't cost anything to buy a Tesla that has V to H capability than it would to buy one that doesn't currently, but having your house be ready to accept it, that's the challenge, is being able to do that. And that's also where there are a lot of companies that make home charging equipment that will allow you to do this if your car's capable. Who are those brands? They're not marketing, they're not advertising. And like, again, I know some of them, but I can throw out a couple of names and you'd be like, who are these people? Like they're Chinese companies that are selling online primarily to Tesla owners with adapters and things like that. And that's how they're building their name. They're not marketing the energy storage side of it. They're not branding as that.
Have we answered your questions today, Natalie?
Yeah. Do you have any sort of concluding remarks that you want to leave?
I just think it's an exciting industry, even though it's just a metal plastic box that contains energy. Like, I just don't think that the opportunity has been realized yet by so many people who have so much at stake and so many dollars on the line. And I just think it'd be a great experiment to see who cracks that code and blows it up.
Who wins the race? Yeah.
I think the race has started in the background, and to the point, I think what we've spoken most here is that there is an opportunity to reach this market and to get there as a leader and groundbreaking. But the question is, who's going to do it?
Amazing. Thank you so much for your parting words. We're going to track this. It's quite interesting to come back 12 months' time, 18 months' time, see where the market is, and see if anyone's been able to crack it.